The rain came down with a violence that seemed almost personal, sheets of water slamming against the cracked windshield as if trying to drive Henry Lawson off the road. The wipers thrashed back and forth in a losing battle, squealing against the glass. Henry leaned forward over the wheel, his eyes narrowed, knuckles white on the steering column. Beside him, his 6-year-old daughter, Amanda, hugged her stuffed elephant to her chest, her small frame swallowed by the oversized raincoat he had pulled over her shoulders. Every few seconds, lightning lit up the sky like a photographer's flash, and the little girl's wide green eyes flicked upward, shimmering with the reflected fire of the storm. The pickup truck coughed, sputtered, and then died with a pitiful whine, shuddering as if in defeat. Henry slammed the heel of his palm against the steering wheel. "Damn it," he muttered under his breath, though he quickly forced his tone softer, glancing at Amanda. "It's all right, sweetheart. Just the old truck giving up. We'll be fine." He gave her a half smile, the kind he'd perfected over the years, meant to mask the weight pressing on his chest. But his daughter was too perceptive for her age. She always had been. She saw through the smile, though she didn't say a word. Instead, she slipped her tiny hand into his rough, calloused one, offering silent reassurance. Henry exhaled, the sound heavy in the cramped cab. He was tired of the storms that came every season, tired of the endless fight to make ends meet, tired of playing the part of both father and mother. And yet, when he looked at Amanda, when he felt her fingers curling trustingly around his, he knew he would weather 1,000 storms more if it meant keeping her safe. They needed shelter. Now. He pushed open the door against the howling wind, scooped Amanda up into his arms, and pressed forward into the chaos. Rain stung his face like needles. The sky above them split again with another crack of lightning, followed almost instantly by a roar of thunder that seemed to shake the ground itself. His boots splashed through water, pooling on the broken asphalt, as he headed for the only refuge in sight, the looming concrete of an overpass a few 100 meters ahead. If they could just get under it, they'd have a break from the sky's fury. Amanda buried her face against his neck, her breath warm against his skin. "It's so loud, Daddy," she whispered, her voice trembling but brave. "I know, Pumpkin," Henry murmured, kissing her damp hair. "Just hold on. Almost there." It was then, through the wall of wind and rain, that a different sound reached his ears. High-pitched, sharp, slicing through the storm like a distress beacon. A cry. Thin, fragile, desperate. Not the cry of the wind. Not a branch tearing free. A baby. Henry froze in his tracks, his body tightening as instinct took over. He turned, scanning the road, the ditch, the shifting shadows cast by the intermittent lightning. Then he saw it. The shape of an SUV flipped onto its side, half submerged in the rushing floodwater that had gathered in the low dip beside the highway. Its hazard lights blinked weakly, red pulses barely cutting through the gloom. And again, there it was. The cry. "Daddy?" Amanda's voice was small, questioning. He crouched beneath the overpass, setting her down carefully against the dry concrete wall, his jacket shielding her from the spray. He crouched so their eyes were level, speaking quickly but firmly, his tone steady in a way that masked the dread building in his chest. "Listen, Mandy, I need you to stay right here. Don't move until I come back. Understand?" Her little chin quivered. "But—" "No buts." His voice softened, breaking against the strength of her gaze. He brushed her wet hair back from her forehead, kissed her cheek. "I'll be right back. I promise." "Just sing our song for me, okay? Keep yourself brave." She nodded, blinking away tears, and Henry turned, already moving. The storm roared louder, but the baby's cries cut sharper. He charged through the water, his legs pumping, heart hammering in sync with each roll of thunder. The SUV was overturned, its undercarriage exposed, mud and broken glass clinging to its frame. One of the windows was spider-webbed but intact, the interior visible only in flashes when lightning illuminated the world for a heartbeat at a time. Henry pulled at the nearest door, jammed. He tried the next. Locked. He swore under his breath, teeth gritted, rain plastering his hair to his forehead. Through the rear window he caught a glimpse. A car seat, dangling sideways, straps straining against gravity, and within it a baby, squirming, face red from exertion, mouth open in that desperate cry. Water was rising fast inside the vehicle, pooling on the windows, creeping toward the child. Time slowed, the urgency compressing into a single razor-sharp thought. Get the baby out. Henry drew back his arm, tucked his elbow against his ribs, and drove it forward with all his weight into the corner of the rear window. Pain lanced through his arm as glass shattered into 1,000 glittering fragments. He ignored it, shoved shards aside with his jacket sleeve, and wriggled halfway inside, his shoulders straining against the frame. The air smelled of gasoline and wet upholstery. He yanked the pocket knife from his jeans, flicked it open, and sliced cleanly through the straps. The infant tumbled into his waiting hands, damp but miraculously unharmed. He pressed the child against his chest, wrapping his jacket around the tiny body, shielding it from the rain. The baby's cries softened to whimpers, and Henry exhaled in relief, though his muscles remained taut. He scrambled back out into the storm, clutching the bundle to his chest. Behind him, in the driver's seat, he noticed for the first time a woman, unconscious, blood streaking from a gash at her temple. But the rising water was climbing fast, and he had only 2 arms. The baby came first. Always. He staggered back toward the overpass, his boots sinking into mud, the storm raging around him. Amanda saw him before he reached her. She scrambled up, eyes wide, hands clasped together. "Daddy, you found a baby!" Henry dropped to his knees in front of her, placing the bundle in her lap for a moment as he checked the child again, breathing steady, pulse strong, though trembling from the cold. He brushed the wet hair from Amanda's forehead. "Keep her warm. Hold her tight. Daddy's got to go back." "But Daddy—" No arguments. His voice was iron, though his eyes softened at the fear in hers. "You're the bravest girl I know. Keep her safe." Then he was gone again, charging back into the storm toward the wreck, toward the unconscious woman, toward the unknown. Henry reached the SUV again, the storm screaming in his ears, rain soaking through his shirt until it clung to him like a second skin. The sight inside was grim. The woman slumped over the wheel, her face pale beneath streaks of blood. Her chest rose faintly, but the water was already lapping against her seat. "Hold on," he muttered, though she couldn't hear. He braced his shoulder against the frame, yanked on the door with all his strength, grunting as the metal groaned, but refused to budge. The current pressed against the vehicle, shoving at him with each gust of wind. He tried again, his muscles straining, but the latch stayed firm. He cursed under his breath and scrambled to the windshield. It was cracked, but not shattered. He picked up a rock from the roadside, hefted it once, then swung. The first strike bounced uselessly, but the second spiderwebbed the glass further, and the third broke through with a hollow boom. He shoved his arm through, the glass tearing at his sleeve, and reached for the lock. It clicked, and he wrenched the door open against the resistance of the water. The woman slumped sideways into his arms, her weight heavy, her body limp. He hooked an arm beneath her knees, another around her back, and pulled her free. His boots slipped in the mud, his lungs burning, but he staggered toward the overpass, toward his daughter, toward the fragile baby crying against Amanda's chest. By the time he reached them, his muscles trembled from exertion. He lowered the woman carefully onto the dry concrete, checking her pulse, relieved to find it steady though faint. Blood trickled down her cheek, mixing with the rain. He tore a strip from his already ruined shirt and pressed it gently against the wound. Amanda's eyes were wide, shimmering in the dim light. She clutched the infant close, rocking instinctively, whispering the lullaby Henry had taught her long ago. Her small voice rose bravely above the roar of the storm, and to Henry's astonishment, the baby's cries softened, eyes blinking up at Amanda as though she recognized the melody. For a moment, the chaos of the storm fell away. In the shelter of that overpass, Henry saw something tender. His daughter, his brave little girl, soothing a stranger's child as if she had been born for the role. A pang pierced his chest, half pride, half sorrow, for all that Sarah, Amanda's mother, had missed. The wail of sirens grew faint at first, then louder, closer, until flashing lights pierced the gloom. Emergency vehicles fought their way through the flooded road, paramedics rushing out with stretchers and gear. Henry raised an arm, signaling them, his body slumping in exhausted relief. Within minutes, trained hands took over. The unconscious woman was lifted onto a stretcher. The infant carefully transferred to a paramedic, who checked her vitals with brisk precision. Amanda clung to Henry's leg as the chaos swirled around them. He rested a hand on her shoulder, grounding her, grounding himself. "Sir, you're injured," one paramedic said, noting the blood on Henry's arm. "It's nothing," he replied. His gaze never left the baby. "Just make sure she's all right." The man gave him a look, half skepticism, half respect, but nodded. "She will be." As they loaded the woman and child into the ambulance, Henry hesitated. His place was with Amanda. His duty was to keep her safe. And yet, something in him twisted at the thought of letting the baby vanish from his sight. He shook himself. It wasn't his responsibility. He had done his part. Still, when the paramedic asked if he could ride along to give a statement, he found himself nodding. Amanda climbed into his lap inside the ambulance, the stuffed elephant wedged between them. The baby lay in a crib-like stretcher beside them, tiny chest rising and falling steadily. For long moments, Henry simply watched, unable to look away. Something about her tugged at him, a protective instinct as fierce as the storm itself. Amanda noticed. She leaned her head against his chest and whispered, "She's special, Daddy." Henry swallowed, tightening his arm around her. "Yeah, Mandy, she is." The hospital was a blur of motion. Bright lights, antiseptic smells, clipped voices barking orders. They were ushered into a waiting room while doctors whisked the woman and baby into emergency care. Henry filled out forms with slow, aching hands, Amanda clinging to his side. Every so often he glanced through the observation window, catching glimpses of the baby being checked, soothed, stabilized. And with each glance, that strange pull inside him grew stronger. Hours passed. The storm outside raged on, but within the hospital walls the world narrowed to the steady beep of monitors and the soft breaths of sleeping children. Amanda dozed across two plastic chairs, her head pillowed in Henry's lap. He stroked her damp hair absently, his eyes drifting to the nursery window where the infant now slept in a crib. Her tiny fists flexed as if clutching dreams, her lips forming half-smiles. Something about the sight sent warmth flooding through Henry's chest, washing away exhaustion, pain, everything. He remembered Amanda as a newborn, Sarah's tired but radiant smile, the weight of that tiny life in his arms for the first time. He hadn't thought he would ever feel that way again. Yet here he was, heart aching with a protectiveness he couldn't explain. When Amanda stirred and opened her eyes, the first thing she noticed was the baby in the crib. She smiled drowsily and began to hum the lullaby again. To Henry's astonishment, even across the glass, the baby's eyes fluttered open and turned toward the sound. Their gazes met, child and infant, two little souls connecting across an invisible barrier. Henry blinked hard, his throat tightening. It was as though fate itself had orchestrated this night, binding their lives together in ways he could not yet comprehend. He didn't know her name. He didn't know the woman who had been pulled from the wreck. He didn't know why the sound of the baby's cry still echoed in his chest like a bell struck too hard. But he knew this. He was changed. Forever. The night stretched long in the hospital, hours unraveling into one another, but Henry remained awake, anchored by the fragile rhythm of breath from the crib across the glass. Nurses moved in and out of the pediatric ward, their shoes squeaking faintly on the polished floor. Somewhere down the corridor, a monitor beeped steadily, a mechanical heartbeat against the hush. Amanda had slipped back into sleep, her small body warm against his side, but Henry's own rest eluded him. His gaze kept straying to the baby, her tiny fingers curling, her lips twitching in half-formed dreams. At last, footsteps heavier than the nurses echoed down the hall. Two men in suits entered, followed by a woman with an air of command. She was tall, blonde hair pulled into a severe bun, her ice-blue eyes scanning the room with practiced precision. Even from a distance, Henry sensed authority radiating from her, the sort of presence that filled boardrooms and silenced arguments. Yet beneath the composure he caught a flash of something raw. Fear, perhaps, or desperation. When her eyes landed on the crib, her facade cracked for an instant. Her steps faltered, shoulders tightening, and a tremor of breath escaped her lips. Henry realized in that moment who she must be, the child's mother. He stood slowly, careful not to disturb Amanda. The woman approached the glass, one hand pressing against it as though she could reach through. The baby stirred, eyelids fluttering open, and a soft coo replaced the earlier cries. The sound pulled a faint smile from the woman's lips, fragile and fleeting, like sunlight through storm clouds. Henry didn't speak. He simply watched, sensing that words would only shatter the fragile thread holding her together. But after a long silence, she turned, meeting his gaze. "You're the one who found her," she said, her voice steady, but edged with exhaustion. Henry inclined his head. "Yes, ma'am." She studied him in silence. Up close, the power in her presence was even more striking. Her tailored suit was damp at the cuffs, her face still marked by faint scratches. Yet her eyes held a loneliness that startled him, as though they belonged to someone who had built towers of glass and steel only to discover how cold they could be inside. "I owe you more than I can ever repay," she murmured, though her tone was strangely formal, as if gratitude were something she was unused to giving. Henry shook his head. "No repayment needed. I did what anyone would have." "Not anyone," she countered quietly, her gaze piercing. "Most people wouldn't have risked their life in that storm." He shifted under her scrutiny, uncomfortable with praise. "It wasn't a choice. I heard her cry." For a long moment they stood in silence, two strangers bound by a single night's chaos. Then the baby's soft laugh drifted through the glass, light and pure, pulling their attention back to her. Henry saw the woman's eyes shine, though no tears fell. "What's her name?" he asked before he could stop himself. Her lips curved faintly. "Matilda." She spoke the name as though it carried the weight of her whole world. Matilda. The name settled into Henry's chest, solid and permanent, like a stone dropped into still water. He looked at the child again, memorizing the shape of her face, the delicate curve of her tiny mouth. Amanda stirred then, rubbing her eyes. "Daddy?" she whispered, blinking up at him. Her gaze landed on the woman, then on the baby beyond the glass. Is she your baby?" The blonde woman hesitated, caught off guard by the child's directness. Then she nodded, lowering herself so her eyes met Amanda's. "Yes, she's mine." Amanda studied her with solemn curiosity. Then, with the blunt honesty of children, she said, "She was crying, but I sang for her, and she stopped." Something softened in the woman's face, a vulnerability breaking through the armor. "Then I owe you thanks as well," she said gently. "She must have felt safe with you." Amanda smiled sleepily, leaning into Henry's side. "She's special. Daddy says so." The woman's gaze flicked back to Henry, lingering, as if trying to decipher the man who had walked into a storm for a stranger's child. In her world, people wanted something: money, power, connections. But Henry's eyes held nothing but steady calm, concern, and perhaps a trace of weariness. No hunger for advantage, no calculation. It unsettled her more than hostility ever could. "Callista Harrington," she said at last, extending a hand. Her name carried weight, a reputation known far beyond the glass towers of the city. Henry hesitated, then accepted the handshake. His calloused palm dwarfed her delicate one, rough with years of labor. Their eyes met again, and though neither spoke it, both felt the faint spark of something unspoken, fragile but undeniable, born not of circumstance, but of recognition. They released hands, but the echo of that contact lingered. The hours that followed blurred. Doctors updating Callista on Matilda's stable condition, security personnel ensuring privacy, the hum of media speculation rippling beyond hospital walls. Yet within the small cocoon of the pediatric ward, a strange quiet settled between Henry and Callista. They spoke little, but each time Matilda stirred, their gazes found one another, sharing unspoken relief. When dawn finally broke, pale light spilling through the rain-streaked windows. The storm outside had weakened, though debris still littered the streets. Amanda stretched with a yawn, her head pillowed against Henry's chest. Matilda, safe in her crib, cooed softly in her sleep. Callista stood at the window, her profile etched against the dawn. For the first time, Henry noticed the faint tremor in her hands, quickly stilled when she clasped them together. She carried the weight of command easily in public, he realized, but in private moments the burden pressed harder than she let on. He wanted to say something, words of comfort perhaps, but the space between them was still fragile, new, so instead he rose, adjusted Amanda in his arms, and simply said, "She's safe now." "That's what matters." Callista turned, her expression softening. "Yes," she whispered, though her eyes lingered on him longer than necessary, as if she found reassurance, not just in her daughter's safety, but in the quiet steadiness of the man who had brought her back from the storm. And though Henry did not yet know it, though neither of them could have guessed, the night that began with thunder and fear had set something into motion, something larger than either could contain. A thread of fate, woven in rain and lightning, pulling them inexorably toward one another. The storm had passed, but its echo remained, in a baby's cry, a child's song, and the gaze of two souls who, without meaning to, had begun to see each other. The city woke slowly after the storm, but inside the hospital time still felt suspended, as though the rain had sealed them into a separate world where only heartbeats and whispered voices mattered. Henry had not meant to linger, yet hours slipped past unnoticed. Something bound him to that place, to the crib where Matilda slept, to the woman who stood guard with an intensity that belied her polished composure. Callista Harrington carried herself like someone born into command, yet when she leaned against the glass to watch her daughter breathe, Henry glimpsed fragility beneath the veneer. The set of her shoulders was too rigid, the stillness too carefully composed. It reminded him of nights he had sat awake beside Amanda's bed after Sarah died, pretending strength so his child could sleep, though inside he had been breaking. That recognition, silent, shared, was the first tether between them. Amanda tugged at his sleeve, drawing him down to whisper, "Daddy, can we help her? She looks so sad." Henry glanced at Callista. She was speaking with a doctor, her voice low, clipped, but her eyes kept flicking to her daughter, as if afraid to look away for too long. He crouched so Amanda could look into his face. "We did help, Mandy. We kept Matilda safe. That's enough for now." But Amanda shook her head stubbornly, the way Sarah once had when Henry underestimated her resolve. "No, she needs more. She needs someone to tell her it's going to be okay." Children saw truths adults tried to ignore. Henry ruffled his daughter's hair, but her words stayed with him. When Callista returned from the consultation, Henry expected her to thank him formally and retreat behind walls of protocol and lawyers. Instead, she surprised him. She paused, studied Amanda with a softened expression, then crouched with surprising grace so their eyes were level. "You're very brave," she told the little girl. "Matilda is lucky you were there." Amanda's cheeks flushed. "I just sang. Daddy's the hero." Callista's gaze lifted, catching Henry's. He meant to deflect, to shrug as he always did when praised, but something in her eyes held him. For the first time in years, he didn't look away. The silence stretched, charged. Finally, she spoke, her tone quieter. Most people hear a cry and hope someone else answers it. You didn't. Henry's mouth went dry. He wanted to tell her it wasn't heroism, just instinct, that he had lost too much already to ever ignore a cry like that. But the words caught in his throat. All he managed was, "No one should be left alone in a storm." Something flickered in her face. Pain, recognition, perhaps even longing. She straightened quickly, erecting her poise once more, but the moment lingered between them. By afternoon, the hospital discharged them from immediate observation. Matilda would remain a few days for monitoring, but Callista was urged to rest. She resisted, of course. Henry could see it in the tight set of her jaw, the clipped tone with which she dismissed the suggestion. Power did not yield easily. Yet exhaustion weighed on her. Even her perfect posture bent ever so slightly, as though the storm had left invisible fractures. When she finally allowed herself to sit, it was beside Amanda, who had curled into a chair with her stuffed elephant. Henry watched, startled, as Callista reached out almost hesitantly and brushed a strand of hair from the girl's forehead. Amanda blinked up at her with guileless eyes, then leaned into the touch as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Callista froze, unprepared for such easy trust. Her hand hovered in the child's hair a moment longer before she withdrew, almost reluctantly. Henry felt his chest tighten at the sight. It had been years since anyone outside their tiny circle touched Amanda with that kind of tenderness. The day faded into evening. Outside, the storm clouds broke apart, revealing slivers of sky tinged with gold. Nurses dimmed the ward lights, and the hush of night settled once more. Amanda slept in Henry's lap, her breaths even. Across the room, Callista sat by Matilda's crib, her hand resting lightly on the railing, eyes shadowed but watchful. Henry shifted, muscles sore, but his mind restless. The hospital hum fell away, leaving only the rhythm of breath, the soft creak of chairs, the distant patter of rain fading into silence. He found himself watching Callista, studying the curve of her profile, the faint bruise at her temple, the way her lips pressed together when fatigue threatened to claim her. She looked less like an untouchable CEO and more like what she was at her core, a mother terrified of losing the only piece of her heart she had left. And in that moment, Henry felt something dangerous. An ache, a pull, the stirring of emotion he had long buried. He had told himself there was no space for such feelings, not when grief had carved him hollow, not when Amanda needed every scrap of his strength. Yet here, in the quiet aftermath of the storm, he felt it rise, unbidden. Callista must have sensed his gaze. She turned, meeting his eyes across the dim room. For a heartbeat, neither looked away. The air between them thickened, weighted not with words, but with the unsaid, the shared loneliness, the burdens carried in silence, the unexpected recognition of themselves in each other. Henry's throat worked. He wanted to speak, to break the spell before it consumed him. But before he could, Matilda stirred, whimpering. The spell shattered. Callista bent immediately to soothe her daughter, voice low, steady, intimate. Henry looked away, ashamed of the sudden rush of longing that had swept through him. Yet even as he tried to bury it, he knew the truth. The storm had not just broken the city, it had broken something open in him as well. When dawn returned again, pale and gentle this time, Henry rose to stretch his stiff limbs. He gathered Amanda in his arms, kissed her hair, and told her softly they would be going soon. Callista approached, Matilda cradled carefully against her chest. For once, the armor of her professional life was absent. She looked simply like a woman holding the most precious part of herself. "Thank you," she said again, but this time her voice carried no formality, no script. It was raw, almost vulnerable. Henry nodded, unable to trust his own voice. Amanda stirred and lifted her head sleepily. "Will we see them again, Daddy?" The question hung heavy. Callista's eyes flickered with something unreadable, perhaps hope, perhaps fear. Henry forced a gentle smile for his daughter. "We'll see." But deep inside, where storms had left their mark, he knew the answer. Fate had already woven their threads together. This was not the end. It was only the beginning. The days after the storm unfolded like fragile petals, each one uncertain, trembling, yet undeniably alive. For Henry, life returned in fragments, the hardware store's familiar scent of sawdust and oil, Amanda's laughter echoing against their apartment walls, the steady rhythm of work that kept their modest lives intact. Yet beneath the surface, everything had changed. He could not forget the hospital. The sterile corridors now lingered in his memory as vividly as the rain-slicked night of the rescue. He could not forget the fragile weight of Matilda in his arms, her small body pressed against his chest while chaos raged. And most of all, he could not forget Callista Harrington's eyes when they met his across the dim light of the pediatric ward. Eyes that spoke of loneliness buried beneath power, of a woman who had forgotten how to lean on anyone, yet who, for a fleeting moment, had allowed herself to be seen. Henry told himself he would not see her again. Worlds so far apart rarely collided twice. She was a woman of glass towers, chauffeur-driven cars, and names whispered in financial circles. He was a single father whose boots carried the mud of construction sites, whose greatest treasure was the small hand of his daughter tucked into his. But late at night, when Amanda had fallen asleep and the apartment was hushed, he caught himself staring out the rain-streaked window, replaying the sound of Callista's voice, the way she had held her daughter with fierce tenderness. Amanda, for her part, seemed to carry no doubts. Children seldom did. She spoke often of the baby, as if Matilda were already part of their lives. She drew pictures of three figures together, herself, her father, and the blonde woman holding a laughing child. When Henry gently suggested that Callista and Matilda lived in a very different world, Amanda only tilted her head, unconvinced. "But, Daddy," she said, "storms bring people together. You told me that." He had no answer. Their lives might have diverged again, if not for the phone call. It came one grey morning as Henry was repairing a faulty generator at the hardware store. The voice on the other end introduced herself crisply as Vivian Audrey, head of public relations for Harrington Global. She spoke with the polished cadence of someone accustomed to bending narratives to her will, but beneath the formality, Henry sensed urgency. "Mr. Lawson," she began, "the media has taken hold of your rescue. We believe it would serve both your interests and ours to address the public directly. Ms. Harrington would like to invite you to a small press conference this Friday. We hope you'll consider attending." Henry nearly laughed at the absurdity. Him standing before cameras, answering questions while microphones shoved into his face. But Vivian pressed on, assuring him it would highlight the bravery of an ordinary man, shift scrutiny away from Callista's leadership, and, most importantly, celebrate the miracle of Matilda's survival. He hesitated only for Amanda's sake. She deserved to see her father recognized, even if the thought made him uncomfortable, and a part of him, a small, traitorous part, longed for another glimpse of Callista, if only to assure himself that night had been real. Friday came, draped in autumn chill, the city still bearing scars from the storm. Henry wore his best shirt, though it was years old and frayed at the cuffs. Amanda skipped beside him, her hair tied neatly with a ribbon, pride glowing in her small chest. The conference was held in a modest auditorium, yet the air hummed with flashing cameras and whispered speculation. When Callista entered, the room stilled. She wore a dark suit that sculpted authority, but her gaze softened instantly when it found Henry. For a moment the press, the lights, the polished speeches fell away. Only two people remained, one who had carried her child through the storm, and one who had entrusted him, if only by fate, with her world. She stepped onto the stage and spoke words carefully chosen, thanking Henry formally, praising the courage of ordinary citizens in extraordinary moments. But when she turned to him, her voice trembled on the edges of sincerity that no speechwriter could craft. "This man reminded me," she said, "that strength does not always come from power or wealth. Sometimes it comes from a heart unwilling to turn away." Henry felt heat climb his neck as the cameras flashed, Amanda's small hand squeezing his. He spoke briefly, fumbling, unpolished, yet his words carried the weight of truth. "I didn't save her for thanks. I heard a baby crying. That's all it took. We all have a choice when we hear someone in need. That night I just couldn't walk away." The press ate it up. But more importantly, Callista's eyes shone with something beyond relief, recognition, gratitude, maybe even the spark of something unnamed. In the weeks that followed, excuses to meet multiplied. There were discussions of safety initiatives, reviews of security protocols, photo opportunities meant to polish reputations. Yet each time Henry and Callista found themselves in the same room, conversations slipped beyond business. She confessed almost shyly that she once dreamed of teaching before corporate destiny claimed her. He admitted he wrote poetry no one ever read. She listened when he spoke of the ache of loss. He listened when she whispered of the emptiness hidden beneath accolades. And Amanda and Matilda, oh, how quickly children bridged gaps adults struggled to cross. Amanda's songs became Matilda's laughter. The baby's first attempt at a word came not as mama or dada, but a garbled version of Manda, sending Callista to tears she could not suppress. Their bond grew like wildflowers in unexpected soil, natural and unstoppable. Henry found himself invited into spaces he had never imagined. The penthouse with its floor-to-ceiling windows, the gleaming boardroom where city decisions were made, the hushed nursery lit by golden lamps where Matilda slept. Yet what struck him most was not luxury, but the glimpses of Callista stripped of armor, her laughter when Amanda told a joke, her wonder when Matilda learned a new trick, her stillness when she dared to let silence hold her. And slowly, inevitably, something fragile deepened between them. It was not spoken, not named, but it hung in the air like a current, sparking in glances held too long, in brushes of hands when passing papers, in the warmth that lingered when they stood too close. One evening, rain returned. Not a storm, just a gentle shower tapping against the windows. They stood together watching, the girls asleep nearby, the world outside blurred by droplets. Henry shifted, nerves taut, words pressing against his throat. "You've built towers," he murmured at last, "but you don't have to stand in them alone." Callista turned, her lips parting, eyes luminous in the dim light. For a heartbeat she wavered between retreat and surrender. Then she stepped closer, close enough that Henry could feel her breath. The kiss was not sudden, not fierce. It was tentative, aching, the kind of kiss born of storms survived and walls slowly lowered. It spoke of gratitude, of longing, of the terrifying possibility of love rediscovered. When they parted, Callista's voice trembled. "I don't know if I remember how to do this." Henry cupped her cheek gently, his rough hand surprisingly tender. "Neither do I. But maybe we can learn together." The world beyond their small circle still spun with politics, scandals, and ambitions. There were battles yet to fight, obstacles that would test them. But in that moment, as rain whispered against the glass and two children slept safe, they chose something rare: to believe that love could bloom even in the ruins of storms. And perhaps that was the truest miracle of all. If you've been carried into this world of storms, second chances, and unexpected love, don't let the story end here. Like this video if it touched your heart. Subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter, and share your thoughts in the comments, because every story grows brighter when we tell it together.